I love tier lists. Ranking different characters, weapons, armor, and abilities in games is a fun process, and I've always enjoyed watching and learning from other people's rankings in games I play, and even ones I don't. So today, I'm going to make my own tier list for the subclass branches in Destiny 2 and how they rank in PvE. But instead of packing a single video filled with all 27 subclass branches that exist in the game, we're going to fill out the tier list over a series of videos starting with the Warlock. Before we dive in, there are a few things that I think are important to consider when constructing a tier list. First, it's important to have an understanding of what you're tiering, so before I give a subclass branch a rank, I'm going to quickly go over its abilities. Second, to avoid too much complication, I'm going to give myself a few rules to follow. Rule number 1. Exotic weapons are not going to play a role in the ranking of different subclass branches. There are too many of them and too many nuanced interactions between the different subclasses in the game that have impacts on the overall performance of a subclass branch. That brings me organically to rule number 2. I'm only going to consider subclass-specific exotic armor when ranking subclasses, and builds also won't play a role in the ranking on my list. Once again, there are simply too many nuanced interactions between exotic armor, builds, and subclasses to consider them all in a ranking. Finally, for rule number 3, effectiveness in raids isn't going to factor into my tier list results. The meta in Destiny 2's raids is very narrow, and only a few choices are worth bringing, with other choices working well in niche encounters, but still feeling like a side grade that doesn't truly outshine the best. With that said, when you branch into less strict environments like public events, strikes, dungeons, and finally Nightfall ordeals at legend difficulty and above, the value of different subclasses become apparent and easily quantifiable. With those rules in mind, let's get started with the tier list. We're going to start things off with the Dawnblade, the Warlock's solar subclass. Like with all Warlock subclasses, it has access to a healing rift and an empowering rift, 3 glides, balanced, burst, and strafe, and 3 grenades, the fusion grenade, firebolt grenade, and solar grenade. With all of those universal mechanics in mind, now we can start talking about the different subclass branches, and we're going to start with the bottom branch, the Attunement of Flame. For the melee ability, we have Igniting Touch. Strike an enemy with this ability to burn them, and if you kill them with the ability, they explode. Fated for the Flame is a passive ability that enhances your super, Daybreak. Daybreak projectiles have tracking, and on impact they launch a streak of flames behind them. This increases their damage. Next, Everlasting Flame is another passive for Daybreak. Killing an enemy with Daybreak increases its duration. Finally, Phoenix Dive is an additional ability for the subclass. You can activate it while in the air to descend to the ground and restore your health. And while Daybreak is active, it causes an explosion at your point of impact, dealing minor damage. Now let's start breaking this stuff down. While all of the abilities in the Attunement of Flame sound cool, they're actually all really bad, and the biggest issue with them is that they don't create a gameplay loop. A gameplay loop is a set of abilities that you can chain together for improved effects, additional effects, or improved efficiency. It's okay for a subclass to not have a loop, but if your abilities can be used in any order, they have to be impactful when you use them. In other words, abilities with long cooldowns without any synergy need to do a lot when you activate them. Igniting Touch does not do enough damage on hit, and its explosion on kill is also weak. Warlocks overall have the weakest melee abilities in terms of damage, but the better Warlock melee abilities have additional utility attached to them, like cooldown reduction and other synergies that make them valuable. Igniting Touch has none of that. Phoenix Dive is weird because it's unique and fun to use, but the healing it provides isn't better than the healing you can receive through different means on other subclass branches. Warlock's Voidwalkers have Devour, Titans can punch things for healing, and Hunters have some healing in their kits too. Phoenix Dive also lacks synergy with the rest of the kit within the Attunement of Flame. It just exists because I guess the developers thought it was cool, but it doesn't really jive with anything. At the very least, if an ability is going to be a part of a subclass, it should fit with that subclass thematically. And again, if it is going to be something completely random and thrown in because it looks cool, it should be really good, and Phoenix Dive isn't. The one saving grace for the Attunement of Flame is its super. It's a roaming super that deals good damage with a good duration, but a good super isn't enough to make an overall bad class worth using. There aren't many things in Destiny or any game that I would tell people aren't worth using, but the problem is the Attunement of Flame's base set of abilities are so bad that even if you pair it with the best exotic weapon and the best exotic armor and the best stat rolls possible and a new pair of sneakers and a cool monitor with 144Hz refresh rate and the best graphics card that money could buy, all of that stuff would be better suited with a better subclass branch. So with all of that said, the Attunement of Flame is a solid F tier. Feels bad. Now let's move on to something better, the Attunement of the Sky. Its grenade ability, Heat Rises, allows you to consume your grenade to gain the Heat Rises buff. It removes your air accuracy penalty, extends your glide duration and effectiveness. The passive ability Winged Sun allows you to fire weapons, use your melee ability, and throw grenades while gliding. Airborne Final Blows also extend the duration of Heat Rises slightly and reduce the cooldown of your melee ability by 25% per kill. Your melee ability Celestial Fire sends out a spiral of 3 explosive solar projectiles. Finally, the Attunement of Sky also has a unique ability called Icarus Dash. You can activate it while mid-air to dodge, and this ability can activate twice in rapid succession. The Attunement of Sky is better than the Attunement of Flame in almost every way. It has a fun gameplay loop and its abilities are thematically consistent. It also works incredibly well with the Sunbracer's exotic gloves. These gloves increase the duration of your solar grenade, which means more total damage, and melee abilities reset your grenade and allow you to throw grenades without a cooldown for about 5 seconds after a melee ability kill. Since Celestial Fire's cooldown gets reduced so much when you kill enemies while airborne, you'll have the potential to secure a lot of kills with it, which means you'll be turning battlefields into literal fields of fire. With that good stuff out of the way, unfortunately, we have to talk about the bad, because the Attunement of Sky isn't perfect. Celestial Fire is a very cool melee, and it works incredibly well from long range and while airborne because of its mild tracking and its straight line trajectory. And you get to use it a lot because of Winged Sun. The problem is its damage is horrible, just like the other Warlock melee abilities. As soon as you leave the lowest tier of difficulty in the game, Celestial Fire starts to feel like crap. Higher difficulty environments also expose issues with Heat Rises and aerial combat in general. Besides the fact that Destiny isn't designed with aerial combat in mind, a good number of places in the game don't feel great to hover in, and your in-air accuracy is bad unless you have buffs or mods, rapidly chaining together kills to keep your Heat Rises buff active becomes more challenging as enemies scale up and take longer to kill. You're also quite a bit easier to kill while you're floating in the air unless you're strafing around really fast, which is not always practical in some of the smaller environments in the game. To make matters even worse, it's hard to chain kills together when you have teammates around who are trying to do the same thing, especially if they're not drunk and playing stupid. And any subclass that feels worse to play when you have teammates around is not ideal. Then you have the other issue of not being able to fly around and be Lord of the Skies when you're capturing or defending objectives, which happens more than you realize in PvE, or standing in static buffs like Healing Rifts or Well of Radiance. Even something as simple as DPSing a boss is less effective when you're flying around. Next up, Icarus Dash is a cool ability and it's fun to use, but in PvE, at best it's going to get you out of a position that you probably shouldn't have been in, and at worst you won't need to use it at all. One final thing to note that's really unfortunate, the Daybreak Super on the Attunement of Sky isn't as strong as the Super on the Attunement of Flame. This is because it doesn't have the Everlasting Fire and Faded for Flame passives. It's still good, but not as good. What this means is the Attunement of Sky is really good, but it does have legitimate shortcomings that keep it from being a truly top-tier subclass. It's gonna sit comfortably in B tier. The final subclass branch for the Dawnblade is the middle branch, the Attunement of Grace. Your grenade ability is Divine Protection. You can convert your damaging grenade into a healing grenade that you can throw directly at a teammate or throw onto the ground to create an interactable object. It can be picked up by every member of your fire team, including you, and on contact it heals you to full and provides you with a small overshield. Your melee ability is Guiding Flame. You hit an enemy and deal minor burn damage over time, and grant you and all nearby allies a damage buff to their weapons. Benevolent Dawn is a passive ability that causes healing or empowering your allies with damage buffs to reduce the cooldown of your melee, grenade, and rift. Finally, your super is Well of Radiance. You thrust your Daybreak Sword into the ground and create a giant healing and empowering rift that lasts for 30 seconds. If you play Destiny 2, then it's not going to be a surprise, but the Attunement of Grace is an S-tier subclass. Now this one is going to take a little bit longer to talk through because the things that make it so good are simple but not entirely obvious. We'll start with the melee ability Guiding Flame. Like with all Warlock melee abilities, its damage is terrible, but it provides a damage buff to your guns, to you, and all nearby allies. And in this game, guns are always your primary source of offense, and giving them buffs, especially to their damage, is huge. The next more subtle thing that makes Guiding Flame an S-tier ability within an S-tier subclass is its effects activate on enemy hits instead of kills. I feel a lot of RPGs have always struggled finding a good balance between how hard it is to trigger an on-kill ability with its cooldown and the effectiveness of the ability when it doesn't kill the target. Abilities that activate on hit avoid this problem altogether by triggering if you hit the target. Essentially, you get the effect every time you activate the button if you're not a potato and completely missing your intended target. There are a few examples of great on-kill effects in Destiny and some bad ones too, and incidentally, we've talked about an example of each today. Winged Sun on the Attunement of Sky is a passive ability with an on-kill effect, so it has literally zero investment and rewards you whenever you meet its criteria of killing an enemy while airborne. It's an S-tier ability, the only downsides being it's providing benefits for a low damage melee ability and barely extending the duration of one of the most valuable buffs in the Attunement of Sky, Heat Rises. On the flip side, the Attunement of Flame's melee ability, Igniting Touch, has an on-hit effect of burning a target and an on-kill effect of causing them to explode, but they're both trash, and when you miss the on-kill effect, when you were actively trying to trigger it, it feels even worse. Next up, the Benevolent Dawn passive creates one of the most exciting, engaging, and effective gameplay loops in Destiny 2. One of the simpler gameplay loops to implement revolves around using one ability to reduce the cooldown of another, and Benevolent Dawn allows you to do that with all of your abilities. You charge up a grenade and throw it to a teammate to heal them. That triggers Benevolent Dawn, which gives you cooldown reduction while the buff is active. Then you hit an enemy with Guiding Flame, which empowers you and all of your allies with weapon damage and extends the duration of Benevolent Dawn. From there, you place a rift, your allies stand in it, and extend Benevolent Dawn again, and before you know it, your grenade is ready to throw again, and the loop starts over. So, we've got effective abilities with strong on-hit effects, a powerful gameplay loop that, when used correctly, provides massive cooldown reduction so you can spam abilities, but it gets even better. There are several subclass-specific exotic armor pieces that enhance the subclass branch's abilities tremendously. So unlike the Attunement of Flame that's trash regardless of what it's wearing, and the Attunement of Sky that excels incredibly well with one exotic and doesn't really gain great benefits from others, the Attunement of Grace is flexible. My personal favorite exotic to pair with the Attunement of Grace is the Starfire Protocol. This exotic increases your damage potential significantly. The Starfire Protocol gives you an additional fusion grenade charge, and empowered weapon damage, damage dealt while affected by an empowering rift or an empowered melee, reduces the cooldown of your fusion grenades, and grenade kills reset your rift cooldown. The Starfire Protocol is essentially adding more cooldown reduction to the already insane cooldown reduction the subclass branch has in its base kit, but it also lets you pump out more damage by giving you access to a lot more grenades to throw and forcing you to use the empowering rift to get the most out of the exotic. One last thing that I'd be a fool for not mentioning is the super ability Well of Radiance. You're nearly unkillable while you're inside the well, and the damage buffs it provides are great, with the only caveat being if you don't have a lot of ammo available, you won't be able to dish out as much damage as you would with a normal roaming super or a one-off super. Now, truth be told, I could talk about the Attunement of Grace all day because it's simultaneously an S-tier subclass in Destiny 2's PvE sandbox and a really well-designed class that makes supporting your teammates engaging and gives you a means to dish out solid damage at the same time. It's also one of my favorite subclasses in the game. But unlike Captain America, I can't do this all day, so I'm gonna close out this section by saying the Attunement of Grace is deserving of its S-tier ranking, but it's also something worth studying if you're curious about what makes a class good, not just in Destiny, but in RPGs in general. And there we go, that's going to do it for the first part of this multi-part tier list series. If you enjoyed the format for this, let me know, but also let me know how you feel about the rankings I gave to the different subclasses, and what's your reason if you think something should be higher or lower. Also, if you'd like to take part in the selection of what subclass I cover in the next part of the tier list video series, then be sure to check out the poll on the community tab for iBluairJgR. One final thing, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel more than you already do just by watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting, you can head over to patreon.com/iBluairJgR to become a patron. As always, the name of the game is Destiny 2, the name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.